The wind never seemed to rest on our land. It howled through the canyons and over the dry, dying grass like it mourned something long gone. Sometimes I thought it mourned me. My name is Evelyn Kane, daughter of the man who owned half the valley, cattle, fences, and fear. To everyone else, he was a respected rancher. To me, he was a storm that never passed. I had grown up under his shadow, knowing the weight of silence better than any words. The mornings began with chores, the sting of cold water, and the smell of leather and sweat. I learned to keep my head down, to answer softly, and to never question his orders. He didn't need to raise his hand often. His voice did most of the breaking. But the worst wound he ever gave me wasn't from anger. It was from shame. The day he made me kneel before the townsfolk and called me ungrateful, weak, a disgrace to the Kane name. That was the day my voice died in my own throat. It was the summer the Apaches were being pushed farther south. The army had taken most of their land, and every rancher in the territory spoke of them like ghosts, dangerous, proud, and near extinction. I had never seen one up close, not until that day. My father had traded horses with the cavalry and was showing off his prize in front of the men who gathered at the general store, ranch hands, soldiers, drifters. I had come to bring him water, quiet as always, my dress dusty and my eyes to the ground. But something had gone wrong with the deal. One of the soldiers said my father had cheated him on a horse's age. My father didn't like being questioned. He turned the fury that should have gone to the man beside him onto me. He shouted that I embarrassed him, that my mother had died giving birth to a burden. He grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me forward before them all, forcing me to stand in the dirt while he ranted. His words were sharper than any whip. I remember the laughter of some of the men, the pity of others, and the silence of one. A man standing apart from the crowd, his skin bronze, his hair long and dark, eyes like thunderclouds watching from the edge of the street. That was the first time I saw Chayton. My father struck me across the face, not hard enough to kill, but hard enough that the world tilted sideways. I fell to my knees and the dust clung to my dress, to my tears. My father's boots paced in front of me, still spitting venom, still feeding on humiliation, but I wasn't listening to him anymore. My eyes found the stranger's. He didn't look away. There was no pity in his stare, only a kind of quiet rage. When my father finally walked off, leaving me in the dirt, I stood on shaking legs. The men had turned away. The world had moved on. But he hadn't. Chayton stayed where he was, a few paces away, hands bound in rope, a prisoner being led by soldiers, though his bearing was that of a king. One of them shoved him forward, and for a heartbeat his eyes met mine again. No words, just recognition, as if he saw everything that had happened to me and carried some part of it himself. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing my father's voice, kept feeling the weight of all those eyes watching me crumble. But over that memory hovered another. Those dark eyes steady on me in the street, silent but fierce like a promise. A week passed. My father rode out with his men, leaving me behind to tend the ranch. I went down to the creek at dawn to wash, the world painted in pale gold. And that's when I saw him again, Chayton, standing across the water, free of his ropes. I don't know how he escaped. Maybe the soldiers never made it to the fort. Maybe the land itself helped him vanish. He didn't move toward me. He just stood there watching, as if asking if I was still the girl who knelt in the dust. I should have screamed. I should have run. But instead I said his name, softly, uncertain, like it belonged to something sacred. Chayton. He crossed the creek, the water rippling around his boots, and stopped a few steps from me. He spoke in slow English, his voice deep and quiet. You don't belong to him. I didn't know what to say. My hands trembled. My father had always told me the Apache were savages, killers and thieves. But there was nothing savage in the way he looked at me. There was grief, yes, and anger. But beneath it all, there was a gentleness that undid me completely. I saw you, he said. When he broke you, tears burned my eyes. I wanted to deny it, to say I wasn't broken, but I couldn't. My silence said everything. He stepped closer, not touching me, just close enough for me to feel his warmth in the cool morning air. You remember what it is to stand, he whispered, or he wins. That was the moment something fragile in me began to shift. I had spent my whole life shrinking, apologizing for being alive. But under that quiet dawn, Facing a man the world had branded an enemy, I felt seen for the first time. He turned to leave then, melting into the trees like the ghost they said his people were. I stood there for a long time, the hem of my dress damp, my heart shaking. When I returned to the ranch, I felt my father's eyes on me from the porch. I lowered mine and said nothing, but inside something had changed. A tiny ember had been lit, of anger, of defiance, of love I didn't yet understand. That was the day I began to dream of freedom. And the man who had looked at me not as a daughter of Cain, but as Evelyn, a woman who could still rise even from the dust. The weeks that followed were a quiet war inside me. I moved through the house like a shadow, careful and polite just as I had always been. My father's temper seemed to have cooled, though I knew it never truly did. It only slept until it found another reason to wake. But even his anger couldn't reach the place in me that had changed. Chaitin's words stayed with me. You remember what it is to stand, or he wins. The sound of his voice became part of my silence, like a river running deep beneath frozen ground. Every time I looked at the hills beyond our fence line, I felt something stir. Not rebellion yet, but something close. It frightened me almost as much as it thrilled me. It was near dusk the next time I saw him. I'd gone to fetch water from the old well behind the barn, the sun bleeding red across the horizon. When I turned, he was there, half shadow, half dream, standing between the cottonwoods. Someone will see you, I whispered, though my heart wasn't afraid of him, only of being caught. No one looks at ghosts, he said softly, a corner of his mouth lifting. There was sadness in his smile, as though he already knew how fragile this moment was. He'd come to thank me, he said, though I hadn't done a thing for him. He spoke of the soldiers, how they'd killed his brother when they tried to escape, how he'd wandered for days through the desert with no water. His voice didn't tremble, but mine did when I asked, "And now? Now I stay where I can see the man who breaks and the one he broke," he said. Maybe to remember that not all prisons have walls. I don't know what came over me then. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was something older, something born in the earth itself. I asked him to stay until dark. We sat near the well, saying little. The air smelled of rain that wouldn't come. I told him things I'd never told another soul, how I dreamed of leaving, how I feared the sound of my father's boots, how I sometimes stood at the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. He listened like the world depended on it. When the night came, I realized how much the darkness could comfort. It wrapped around us like a secret. Chaitin told me of the stars. The Apache believed they were the campfires of ancestors watching and waiting. I looked up and wondered if my mother's fire burned somewhere among them, and whether she was proud or ashamed of the daughter who couldn't fight back. Before he left, he said, "You are not weak, Evelyn. You are waiting." Those words sank deep. Days passed, then nights. We met again, always in the quiet places behind the ridge by the old sycamore near the stream that cut through the canyon. He taught me small things, how to listen for a hawk before you see it, how to move without the grass telling on you. But more than that, he taught me to breathe again. I began to smile, small, secret smiles that would vanish when I heard my father's voice. My father noticed. He didn't know the reason, but he felt the shift, and suspicion is a cruel thing in the hands of a man who already loves power too much. He started watching me closer, asking questions that weren't questions. "Where have you been, girl? Why's your dress torn? What's got you grinning like a fool?" I lied badly. My heart raced every time I left the house. One night, as I slipped from my window, I saw his lantern burning on the porch. I froze, but he didn't move. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. That night with Chaitin was the most beautiful and most dangerous of all. A storm rolled over the mountains, the kind that seemed to pull lightning from the bones of the earth. We found shelter in a narrow canyon, huddled near a small fire he built from dry brush. The rain came down hard, echoing like drums. We spoke louder than we should have, about dreams, about what might be if the world were kinder. He told me that once, before the soldiers came, his people called this land Zil Wigaisian, the sacred mountain. "Everything has a spirit," he said, "even what they take from us." I looked at him then, really looked. The scars on his wrists from rope, the stillness in his shoulders, the way his eyes softened when they met mine. I realized I had fallen in love without meaning to, and I also knew what that meant. I had doomed us both. When the thunder broke, I flinched, and he reached out, only brushing my sleeve. That single touch felt like sunlight after years of winter, but even then I could feel the world closing in. The truth that something this pure could never survive under my father's roof, or the soldier's flag. We didn't speak of love. We didn't need to. The silence between us carried it, heavy and unspoken, like the weight of the storm itself. By the time dawn came, the rain had stopped, and the clouds were thin and gray. I told him I had to go back, that if my father found me gone, he'd come looking. Chayton nodded, though I saw the struggle in his eyes. He said quietly, "If he hurts you again, I will come for you." I didn't know whether it was a promise or a curse. Maybe both. When I returned, my father was waiting on the porch. Mud on my hem betrayed me. He didn't say a word, just looked at me long and hard, and in that look I knew he had already guessed too much. That night I lay awake, heart pounding, the sound of the storm still echoing in my chest. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere safe to run to. Love had made me bold, but it had also made me visible. And in this land, being seen could kill you. I closed my eyes and whispered his name into the dark. Chayton. Somewhere out in the wilderness, maybe he whispered mine too. But deep down I felt the truth stirring like thunder on the horizon. Love, in this world, always came at a price. And soon we would have to pay it. The days after the storm felt too still, like the land was holding its breath. I went about my chores with a trembling sort of calm, pretending not to feel my father's eyes on me. But he was watching. I could sense it even when his boots were nowhere near. He stopped speaking much. That was always worse than his shouting. Silence meant calculation. I'd find him sitting on the porch at night, cigar glowing, staring toward the dark hills where Chayton hid. He never said his name. Perhaps he didn't know it, but I could feel in his posture that he knew. A father's instinct for ownership, not protection. One evening he followed me to the barn. The horses stirred as if they sensed the coming storm. He leaned against the doorpost and said too softly, "I raised you better than to make a fool of me." My throat closed. I managed, "I haven't." He smiled, cold, certain. "You think I don't see it? The way you disappear before dawn, the way you come back smelling of rain and fear." I didn't answer. Fear tastes like dust. You swallow it enough times and it coats everything. That night he locked the doors. Windows too. Said it was for my safety. Said there were savages roaming near the river. But I understood. I was the one he meant to cage. For 3 days I didn't see Chayton. I told myself he'd gone back to his people, that the wilderness had claimed him again. Yet every sound beyond the fence made my heart leap. On the 4th night I heard a whisper through the crack of my window. "Evelyn." I almost cried his name aloud. But he pressed a finger to his lips. The moonlight turned his face silver in shadow. "He watches," he murmured. "You must leave soon." "How?" I asked. "He'll kill me before he lets me go." His jaw tightened. "Then I take you before he can." It should have frightened me, but it didn't. Love and fear had long since become the same thing. The next evening I found a way to the old smokehouse behind the orchard. The boards were warped, the hinges loose. It became our place again, hidden by wild sage and the breath of the desert wind. We didn't speak much. Words had become dangerous. He touched my hand once, just once, and in that single heartbeat I felt more alive than in all my years under my father's roof. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. I'll never forget that rhythm. Hard, certain, furious. My father had followed me. Chayton pushed me back into the shadows. "Stay." "No," I whispered. "He'll—" But Chayton was already moving, quiet as the wind circling the side of the building. I heard my father shout my name, heard the metallic click of his revolver. The world shrank to the space between heartbeats. I ran out before either of them could fire. "Stop!" I screamed. "Please stop." The lantern light caught both their faces. The fury in my father's, the grim resolve in Chayton's. 2 worlds meeting, neither willing to yield. "You've shamed me enough," my father spat. "I'll end this." Chayton's voice was calm. "Then end it with me, not her." For a moment I thought the wind itself would tear the sky apart. Then came a crack, a shot or thunder, I don't know which. The light went out. When I could see again, my father was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood dark against his shirt. Chayton stood over him, breathing hard, the gun fallen from his hand. I ran to my father not out of love but instinct. His eyes were full of hate, not pain. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. "You and that savage." Chayton pulled me up, his voice low. "We have to go." I hesitated, one glance at the house, the fields, everything I had ever known. Then the sound of more horses in the distance made the choice for me. We fled into the hills, the moon our only witness. The air smelled of rain again, heavy and bitter. He led me through dry ravines, through the ghost-colored mesquite until my legs gave out. Then he carried me. By dawn, we reached the canyon rim. Below us stretched a land that seemed endless. Red rock and silence, the world remade. But neither of us smiled. We both knew the soldiers would come and my father would lead them. Chayton looked at me, the wind tangling his hair. "There's no going back." "I know." My voice broke. "I never belonged there anyway." He took my hands, rough and warm, and said, "Then you belong here until the world takes it from us." In that moment, I believed him. But somewhere behind the sunrise, I could already hear the echo of hoofbeats again. The storm returning, bringing the price of love with it. The mountains became our prison and our home. Days blurred into each other beneath the burning sun, and nights were cold enough that I could hear my teeth clatter when the wind swept down from the peaks. Yet I was free, freer than I had ever been under my father's roof. Freedom, I learned, was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to keep walking despite it. Chayton moved like the land itself, silent, sure, patient. He taught me how to read the sky, how to listen for the cry of an eagle that might mean rain or danger. We spoke little, but when we did, the words felt sacred. Sometimes I caught him watching me while I slept beside the small fires we dared to build. There was always sadness in his eyes, as though he already lived halfway between this world and the next. Once I asked him why he stayed with me when the mountains could have hidden him forever. He said, "Because I saw you kneel once and I swore I'd never let the world make you kneel again." That vow haunted me. It was both a blessing and a curse. Love that fierce was doomed in a land like ours. We found an old hunting cabin deep in the pines, abandoned and leaning to one side. It smelled of dust and sap, but it had a roof and a door, and that was enough to call it home. We mended what we could, gathered berries, fished in the stream, and spoke of nothing beyond the next sunrise. For a while, the world forgot us. At night he would sit by the fire, carving shapes into wood, a hawk, a horse, a woman's face. His hands were steady even when his eyes weren't. I could tell he missed his people, his brother, the way life used to be before the soldiers came. He never said so, but the silence between us told me. One evening, as the sun bled gold through the trees, he said, "They'll come soon. The land keeps no secrets forever." I knew he was right. My father would have gone to the army, and the army would come with more than anger. They would come with law and pride. Still, we stayed. Because love, once it finds a corner of peace, will hold on to it even as the world burns outside. I remember one night in particular. The air was heavy with pine and rain. I couldn't sleep. I watched Chayton instead, the glow of the fire painting his face in copper light. I told him I was afraid. Not of dying, but of forgetting. Forgetting who I had been before him, he said. "You were never the daughter he made you. You were always the woman you became." Then very softly he added, "If I die, remember that I found peace the day I saw you stand." I wanted to believe in peace, but peace in this world never came without a price. At dawn we saw smoke far below the ridge, soldiers' campfires. The sound of distant hooves carried through the air, faint but certain. Chayton didn't speak. He packed quietly. His knife, the small carvings, what food we had left. He gave me his blanket and told me to keep it close. "They'll follow me," he said. "Not you." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We run together." His eyes softened. "You are brave. But if they find us both, they'll kill you to punish me. If they find only me, you may live." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that I would rather die beside him than live without him. But the words wouldn't come. Only tears did. He took my face in his hands. "Evelyn," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "Love is not just staying. Sometimes it's the leaving." He kissed my forehead once gently, like a farewell. Then he turned toward the trail leading down the mountain. I followed anyway. We moved through the trees as the sun rose, our shadows long and thin. Every rustle made my heart jolt. The soldiers' voices grew louder behind us, men shouting, dogs barking. The hunt had begun. By midday, we reached the edge of a ravine. Across it, the land fell away into endless desert. There was no bridge, no safe path down. Chayton looked at me, then at the horizon. If we cross, he said, we might find my people. And if we don't? I asked. He didn't answer. We started down the slope, careful and quick when the first shot rang out. The sound tore through the air like a scream. A bullet struck the rock near his feet, sending dust into our faces. He pulled me behind a boulder, heart pounding against mine. They're close, he whispered. I gripped his hand. Then we don't stop. We ran again, the world narrowing to breath and heartbeat and the sound of pursuit. My skirt tore on the rocks. The sun beat down mercilessly, and still he pulled me onward, his grip never loosening. When we finally stopped, it was only because there was nowhere left to run. The ravine dropped before us and too wide to leap, too deep to climb. The sound of the soldiers closing in filled the canyon like thunder. He turned to me then, calm even in the face of death. If they take me, he said, they'll make it a warning. Don't let them have that. Tears blurred my vision. What do you mean? But he only smiled. A sad, gentle smile that broke something in me. Remember the fire, he said. Remember standing. The sound of boots echoed closer, and then the world went silent. A silence that comes only before the final storm. That was the last moment we were together before the end. The first shot that struck him did not stop him. I remember the sound, not of the rifle but of his breath catching like the wind through broken glass. He turned, shielded me, and kept running. There was blood on his shoulder, dark and quiet, soaking into the blanket he'd given me the night before. Still, he didn't fall. Chayton never fell easily. By the time we reached the hollow beneath the ridge, the soldiers had surrounded us. The air smelled of gunpowder and dust. My father's voice rose above them, harsh, triumphant, trembling with something that wasn't quite pride. You'll come back with me, he shouted, or I'll drag your corpse instead. I saw his face then, the same face that had watched me grow, that had struck me for speaking, that had broken me before the town. But in that moment I felt no fear. I only saw the smallness of the man before the greatness of the one beside me. Chayton stepped forward, raising his hands, blood dripping from his fingertips. Let her go, he said. Your fight is with me, my father sneered. You think you can take what's mine and live. Chayton smiled faintly, though his voice was soft as the falling snow. I took nothing. I found something the world could never give her, her own heart. The world went still after that. Even the soldiers hesitated, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Then the rifles lifted. I screamed. The next moment was fire and thunder. Smoke swallowed everything. When it cleared, Chayton was on the ground. His body lay between me and the guns, his arms still outstretched as if he could shield me even from death itself. My father stared at him, then at me, his expression hollow, ruined. He's dead, he said, as though saying it could make it true enough to erase him. But Chayton was not gone. Not to me. I fell to my knees beside him, my hands shaking as I touched his face. His eyes were open, staring at the sky that he had loved more than any cage. For a moment I thought I saw him smile. A breath, a whisper of peace before the world turned cold again. The soldiers dragged me away. I remember screaming his name until my throat tore. They took me back down the mountain, through the dust and the dying light. My father rode ahead, never looking back. I didn't speak to him again. Weeks passed before the nightmares stopped waking me. Months before I realized I would never hear his voice again. I stayed near the mountain, working in silence, living small like a shadow. But every time the wind rose through the pines, I heard him, the echo of his promise. I will not let the world make you kneel again. Years later, when they called that place the Warrior's Hollow, I went back. The cabin had fallen, the forest had reclaimed it. Only the carvings remained, half buried in moss, the hawk, the horse, the woman's face. I buried the blanket there and whispered his name one last time. Now, when the snow falls and the wind turns west, I see the smoke rising on the horizon, not from war but from love that refused to die quietly. Some nights I dream of him standing by the fire again, his eyes steady, his voice low, and in the dream I am not broken. In the world's eyes I was the rancher's ruined daughter, but in mine I was the woman he claimed, not as a possession but as a soul. Love in the end was our rebellion, and though the world buried him in silence, I know the mountains remember. Every storm that rolls across those ridges carries his name. Every fire that burns there is still his, and mine.